In 1967, smallpox was killing 2 million people a year. It had been doing this in some form for at least 3,000 years. Egyptian mummies have the scars. It wiped out 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas. It killed more people in the 20th century alone than both world wars combined. And then, in 1980, a group of scientists walked into a room at the World Health Organization in Geneva and declared it gone, not controlled, not manageable, erased. The first human disease ever deliberately removed from the planet. Humans have eradicated exactly 2 diseases in all of recorded history. A third is nearly gone. A fourth is down to single-digit cases per year. These are 4 stories about what it actually takes to delete a disease from the earth, and why we have only managed to do it twice. Smallpox was caused by the variola virus, and it was efficient in a way that made it almost impossible to outrun. It spread through the air, through direct contact, through contaminated clothing and bedding. A single infected person in a village could start a chain that killed hundreds. The disease began with fever and body aches. Then a rash appeared, small red spots that grew into raised bumps, then into hard pus-filled blisters that covered the entire body, including the inside of the throat. About 30% of people who caught it died. The survivors were left with deep permanent scars across their faces and bodies. Many went blind. For millennia, the only defense was variolation, deliberately infecting a person with a mild case of smallpox by blowing dried scab material into their nose or scratching it into their skin. It worked, roughly. About 2% of people who were variolated died from the procedure itself, which was considered an acceptable trade against a disease that killed 30% of those who caught it naturally. Then the first real weapon came not from a laboratory, but from a milkmaid. In 1796, an English country doctor named Edward Jenner noticed that women who milked cows rarely caught smallpox. They caught cowpox instead, a mild illness that left them immune. Jenner took fluid from a cowpox blister on the hand of a milkmaid named Sarah Nelmes and scratched it into the arm of an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps. 6 weeks later, he deliberately exposed the boy to smallpox. The boy did not get sick. Jenner called the process vaccination, from vacca, the Latin word for cow. It was the first vaccine in human history, and it was invented by a man who noticed that milkmaids had clear skin. The eradication campaign began in earnest in 1967 under the World Health Organization. The strategy was not to vaccinate every person on Earth. That would have been impossible. Instead, teams used a method called ring vaccination. When a case was reported, vaccinators raced to the site and vaccinated every person within a defined radius around the patient, creating a firewall of immunity the virus could not cross. They chased it across continents, country by country, village by village, case by case. The last natural case of smallpox occurred in Somalia on October 26, 1977. A hospital cook named Ali Malin developed the rash, was isolated, recovered, and became the last person on Earth to catch smallpox in the wild. The virus now exists in exactly 2 places, a freezer at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta and a freezer at a research facility in Novosibirsk, Russia. The second disease to be erased was not a human disease at all. Rinderpest, from the German for cattle plague, was a virus that killed cattle, buffalo, and wild ungulates with a mortality rate that could reach 100% in unexposed herds. When it swept through sub-Saharan Africa in the 1890s, it killed an estimated 90% of the cattle on the continent. Entire pastoral societies collapsed. The Maasai lost nearly all their herds. Famines followed that killed a third of the population of Ethiopia. The ecological damage cascaded. Without grazing animals, grasslands turned to bushland, and tsetse flies moved into the new habitat, spreading sleeping sickness to humans. The eradication campaign took decades of coordinated vaccination across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Veterinarians tracked outbreaks across borders. vaccinated herds in conflict zones, and worked with nomadic pastoralists who moved their cattle across hundreds of miles of unmonitored territory. The final push used a heat-stable vaccine that did not require refrigeration, critical in regions without electricity or cold storage. In 2011, the World Organization for Animal Health declared Rinderpest eradicated. It was the second disease in history to be deliberately wiped from the earth, and the first animal disease. The announcement received almost no media coverage. Most people have never heard of it. The third disease on the list has been 99.9% beaten but refuses to disappear entirely. Polio was a summer terror. Every year from the 1920s through the 1950s, outbreaks paralyzed tens of thousands of children across the United States and Europe. The 1952 epidemic alone paralyzed over 57,000 Americans, most of them children under 5. Parents kept their children away from swimming pools, movie theaters, and playgrounds. Cities closed public beaches in July. The disease attacked the nervous system, destroying the motor neurons that control muscles. Children who survived the initial infection sometimes lost the ability to breathe on their own. Hospitals filled entire wards with iron lungs, 7-foot metal cylinders that mechanically pumped air in and out of paralyzed lungs. A photograph from Rancho Los Amigos Hospital in California in 1953 shows rows of iron lungs stretching to the back wall, each one containing a child. Jonas Salk's inactivated vaccine arrived in 1955. When the results of the field trial were announced on April 12th, church bells rang across the country. Stores closed. People wept in the streets. Salk refused to patent the vaccine. When asked who owned it, he said, "The people." Could you patent the sun? Albert Sabin's oral vaccine followed in 1961. The combination of the two drove polio out of most of the world within a generation. In 1988, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative was launched. At the time, polio paralyzed roughly 350,000 children per year in 125 countries. By 2023, that number was down to 12 cases in 2 countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan. The virus survives in exactly 2 places on Earth, in regions where conflict and distrust of vaccinators make the final push almost impossible. Polio is not eradicated. It is cornered. The fourth story does not involve a vaccine at all. Guinea worm is a parasite. Humans contract it by drinking stagnant water containing tiny water fleas that carry the larvae. The larvae mature inside the body over about a year, growing into a worm up to 3 feet long. When the female worm is ready to release its larvae, it migrates to the skin, usually the legs or feet, and creates a burning blister. The only way to remove it is to wait for the worm to begin emerging, then wrap it around a small stick and turn the stick a few millimeters each day. The extraction takes weeks. If the worm breaks during removal, the wound becomes infected and the pain gets worse. In 1986, an estimated 3.5 million people were infected across 21 countries in Africa and Asia. The pain is so severe that infected farmers cannot work their fields during harvest season, and in some regions the local name for the disease translates to the disease of the empty granary. There is no vaccine for guinea worm. There is no medicine that kills it. The entire eradication effort has been built on behavior change and water filtration, teaching people to filter drinking water through fine mesh cloth, providing pipe filters that remove the water fleas, and containing infected individuals so they do not recontaminate water sources. It is the most low-tech eradication campaign in history. The Carter Center, founded by former President Jimmy Carter, has led the campaign since 1986. Carter made it his personal mission to see the worm eradicated in his lifetime. In 2023, 13 cases were reported worldwide, 13 down from 3.5 million, using cloth filters and education. No needles, no laboratories, just patience and mesh. 300 million dead from smallpox. 90% of Africa's cattle from Rinderpest, hundreds of thousands of paralyzed children from polio, millions infected by a 3-foot worm from dirty water. 2 of these are gone forever. One is cornered in 2 countries. One is down to 13 cases held off by a piece of cloth. The species that invented nuclear weapons also invented ring vaccination, heat-stable cattle vaccines, oral polio drops, and water filters made of mesh. We are very good at killing things, including diseases. We just do not do it often enough. Subscribe and hit the bell. Next episode, he left a dirty plate out and saved millions of lives. Bare bones. Simple stories about the weirdest things that actually happened.